Namaskar and welcome to our special program on COP26. That's the 26th Conference of Parties happening in Glasgow, and it assumes immense significance as it comes at a time when the world is experiencing many adverse climate-related events. So what does it do? It makes this conference all that more important. The importance it gives to changing our lifestyles, targeted commitments from individuals, communities, cities, states, countries, and the world at large. All this is making it all the more vital and critical. Let's start with the latest updates from COP26. In fact, let's move on the summit which is underway in Glasgow. Prime Minister Narendra Modi began his engagements in Glasgow by meeting the Indian community leaders and Indologists there, as well as climate change innovators from India. The Prime Minister could be seen warmly interacting with them. This interaction took place on the sidelines of the COP26 summit. During the interaction, one sculptor presented a bust of Prime Minister Modi to the Prime Minister himself. And this interaction is seen as a move to strengthen our people-to-people bonds. The opening ceremony of the much-awaited UN COP26 summit on climate change, which is being held in Glasgow, the UK, will take place in a short while from now. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, they greeted world leaders arriving in Glasgow today for the Leaders Summit at the start of the United Nations COP26 Climate Summit. Delayed by a year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, COP26 aims to keep alive a target of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels, the limit that scientists had said would avoid the most destructive consequences to the world. But the conference needs to secure more ambitious pledges to further cut emissions, to lock in billions of dollars in climate finance, and to finish the rules to implement the Paris Agreement with the unanimous consent of nearly 200 countries that signed it. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be one of the first speakers, welcoming the more than 100 guests to the World Leaders Summit, and he will be followed by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and also other dignitaries, including Prince Charles and David Attenborough, and who's the documentarian on nature. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be presenting the formal position on India's climate action agenda and will lay out the best practices and achievements in the sector at COP26 in Glasgow today. In fact, the World Meteorological Organization has said that the extreme weather events, including powerful heat waves and devastating floods, they are now the new normal. And the State of Climate Report for 2021, it highlights a world that is changing before our eyes. According to the study, the 20-year temperature average from 2002 is on course to exceed 1 Celsius above pre-industrial levels for the first time, and global sea levels rose to a new high in 2021. These latest figures for 2021 are being released early by the WMO to coincide with the start of the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow known as COP26.
Again, broken records in the main greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, and despite of the lockdowns last year, the real atmospheric concentrations of those gases were growing, and we broke again a record in carbon dioxide concentration, and carbon dioxide is the most important greenhouse gas contributing 2/3 of the warming so far, and its lifetime is very long. So that's the main problem that we are having when it comes to climate change and warming. And during the past years, since 2013, we have seen 4.4 millimeters sea level rise, whereas 20 years ago it used to be about 2 millimeters per year. So we have doubled the sea level rise, and this is very much coming from the melting of main glaciers.
Well, the State of Climate report, it provides a snapshot of climate indicators, including temperatures, extreme weather events, sea level rises and ocean conditions. The study finds that the past 7 years, including this one, they are likely to be the warmest on record as greenhouse gases reach record concentrations in the atmosphere. The report said that the accompanying rise in temperatures is propelling the planet into uncharted territory, with increasing impacts across the planet.
The bad news is that we have already reached such a high concentration of carbon dioxide that the melting of glaciers and snow and ice and sea level rise will continue for much longer time, for the coming hundreds of years anyhow. But we could stop this negative trend in these weather patterns if we are successful to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. That's a very ambitious goal, but there are good scientific reasons to work for that.
Well, we are joined by a distinguished panel of experts. We're joined by Ambassador Mohan Kumar, former Indian ambassador. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, so let's put it into context. I mean, everyone knows how serious climate change is, and countries have to be more ambitious about their targets. The question is, how does one, they're all talking about net neutrality by the middle of this century. The question is, how does one reach there? How does one put in those mechanisms so that we can reach there swiftly? Yes.
Do you want to interrupt me?
No, actually, I couldn't hear you, but now I can. So go ahead, sir. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark. So thank you for having me. No, I think you raise a very good issue, and I just want to begin by saying that this COP26 is widely considered as the last opportunity to aim a 1.5 degrees Celsius, if you like. The Paris commitment said we will try to keep global warming under 2 degrees centigrade and preferably 1.5 degrees centigrade. And this is because anything over that, it is now clear, the science is so clear that anything over 2 degrees spells catastrophe for mankind. On that, there is absolutely no disagreement. But beyond that, the climate change is an issue that becomes very, very contentious. And it becomes contentious because you have the problem of legacy or historical emissions, and you have the issue of current emissions. And if you look at the legacy or historical emissions, it's very clear that the developed countries and now China are the most responsible for emissions. So it stands to reason that they do much more than other countries like India and the least developed countries. Now, gradually what has happened is the principle of common but differentiated responsibility India negotiated so painstakingly at Rio in '92 has been whittled down. And now we are at a stage when they are talking about common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, but in accordance with national circumstances. So in the light of that, it is now widely considered that the only way in which you can attain a 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels would be if countries take a commitment of net zero, as you rightly mentioned, by 2050. Now, what is this net zero? Net zero essentially means that a country undertakes that all its emissions will be neutralized by the country in terms of carbon sinks, or in terms of technological carbon capture and storage.
Yes.
Now, it comes to India, it is simply impossible for us to indicate 2050 because we are at such a low level of energy consumption that we have a long way to go. So we have been fighting in these climate change summits that these don't equate India, even though our emissions may be the third or the fourth largest. Our cumulative emissions, our historical emissions, and basically our per capita emissions are very, very low given a country of India's size. So this is really the battle that India has been fighting in COP26. I think countries will have to acknowledge that India is making efforts and make a special allowance for India. But make no mistake, the Prime Minister has reached Glasgow, and I only suspect India will be under pressure.
We're also joined by Dr. Vibha Dhawan, who's the Director General at TERI. Thank you very much, ma'am, for being with us. So we were talking a little bit about net zero and how does one actually reach there. The question is, as Ambassador Mohan Kumar was saying, is that, okay, we build all these carbon sinks. The issue is that, okay, so if we can reach from a place where we are right now to a position of net zero, that means we can also reach a position going forward to reverse climate change. Is that technically possible?
Well, technically everything is possible if there is a will, and also that technology should be first developed and then adopted. So therefore it is possible, but the thing is that, as Ambassador just now mentioned, is it fair that the same rule applies for India? I'll say those who are responsible for what has happened, perhaps they should say negative and not net zero. They should go into negative and ensure that what has been done to the environment, and they also have responsibility that technologies are made available to the developing world so that they adopt them.
So you're saying that net negative is a possibility. I mean, people can actually be ambitious enough to say we are going to target net negative by 2050.
They should be. That is what the developed world should be doing.
Okay, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, would you say that technology is moving in this direction? Because, I mean, after all, it is a matter of life and death for the planet. So, you know, I mean, under such circumstances, things come to the fore. People do their best to survive. And perhaps, you know, collectively, there are already efforts to, you know, bring in a green transition. And this will be, you know, for accelerated to a greater extent by the urgency of the moment.
I agree with my co-panelists that technically everything is possible. I think the problem is the politics of climate change, which I have been witnessing. When I was in Paris in 2015 as ambassador, we had the climate change conference of 2015, and it is with some difficulty that we were able to agree to the language in 2015. But one of the basic reasons why India accepted the responsibility in 2015 was because a commitment of $100 billion was made first Copenhagen and then reaffirmed in 2015. Now, what we are seeing today is that that financial commitment has not been fulfilled by the developed countries. And if you look at G20 summit language, it merely says we reaffirm our commitment to 100 billion, and that is likely to happen in 2023 through 2025. And that, I'm afraid, is simply not enough. So I think India has been saying, please make sure we have affordable finance and accessible technology before you start making demands on countries like India to subscribe to net zero. I'll be very, very curious to know what kind of nationally determined contribution India puts forward in Glasgow, because we have missed the deadline of October 12th. And I'm told the Prime Minister himself would like to communicate the nationally determined contribution at Glasgow. So it'll be interesting to see what India does by way of nationally determined contribution. But to answer your question, technologically, it is possible. But what needed is a lot of money. So climate finance is at the key of these negotiations.
Indeed. Dr. Dhawan, obviously finance is key, and what was agreed was $100 billion every year from the developed world to the developing world and the rest of the world, but that seems like a small sum of money, to bring about climate, a reversal in climate change, or to bring about net zero. What would you think? I mean, can one push for something more, because you're not even achieving $100 billion? So, I mean, the idea is that we are well short of targets as far as these things are concerned. And in the overall scheme of things, there cannot be anything called climate justice unless all these targets are met.
Well, you're absolutely right that whatever was even committed, that hasn't come. So therefore, to ask for more finance, perhaps it shouldn't be just a lip service. So we need money. The only thing, and I'm a very optimistic person, is that when we look back 5 years back, it was totally a different scenario. US not committing anything. And also many of us, we were that yes, climate change is a threat.
Yes.
But today we know it's a reality, and therefore, even at a global level, I have a feeling that people will come forward. The other is that yes, definitely India, or we are still developing, but then we also have large number of multinationals operating from India. So at least we need to have a sort of promise from them that they will like to be net zero ASAP, and the policies they are following. Another problem is that it is not just the industry which needs to be net zero.
Okay.
It is that we have to see the entire cycle. What kind of raw material are they using? Is that also produced in the most environment friendly way? So it is ultimately, it's the life cycle analysis that what kind of carbon footprint is the process leading to.
Okay. Indeed.
Yeah.
Ambassador Mohan Kumar, so the carbon footprint is a way of measuring. The issue is now that brings into context, one of the means is, or the mechanisms that have been put in place is carbon markets. And so that you can over time bring about this net zero because of the kind of carbon markets that are involved, credits as well as the opposite of it. So the point is, what do you think? I mean, is this market mechanism the best way forward?
I think it is one of the instruments which is available for doing it. I myself, I'm skeptic about an excessive reliance on the market, because there is a tendency in developed countries to get trade measures like a carbon border tax adjustment, which the European Union is now proposing on all goods and services, especially cement, steel coming from developing countries, other countries. There is talk of carbon leakage. So all these issues will constitute discussions of operationalizing the rule book from Paris. That was a framework agreement that we decided. The rule book, which has to be decided, will look at these instruments. An excessive reliance on carbon market without adequate finance for developing countries, in my view, would not be desirable. You can have a market mechanism only if you provide a level playing field and you provide enough finance to developing countries. If you don't do that,
yes. Host country, which is Britain. We can see Prime Minister has arrived at Glasgow for the opening ceremony of this COP26 Leaders Summit. Indeed. So in a short while from now, in fact, will the opening ceremony will commence of the COP26, which, as we know, is a very important event in terms of the entire globe, in terms of our understanding of how we have to deal with the environment, whether we are going to be responsible. I mean, speak as we say, and I say we as in the whole, all the peoples of the world, basically the human society, because it's a collective effort which not only starts from individuals, it moves from individuals to small groups, communities, from communities to cities, to districts to cities, from cities to states, and states to countries, countries to the world. That's basically what the mechanism is all about. And we are looking here at Prime Minister Narendra Modi meeting the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. India, of course, as we know, has committed 450 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030, which is a huge target, and that is a clear green shift in our energy cycle. And also India is committed to bringing about more use of the circular economy. And less energy consumption as well, in terms of LED bulbs, which became a national movement. Well, the impact of climate change, as we know, is catastrophic on the entire environment, because it would reduce our dependence. I mean, it would reduce food availability, water availability, vital aspects of life, and also, I mean, air, water, and food are vital for life, as you know. And so, basically, that would lead to disease, malnutrition, and probably extinction of various species, and definitely a negative spiral towards difficult times for the planet Earth. And we have with us our guests. In fact, we are still live, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as we can see, has just been received by the host nation, by the host nation's Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the UN Chief Antonio Guterres. You know, the UNFCCC is the host, in fact, of this event. It works under the UN framework, the Conference of Parties. Let's go across now to our guest once again. So we have to look at India's role. And we were talking about that a little bit earlier, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. India with ambitious targets of its own in terms of renewable energy. Would you see, this as, making a statement also? You were there when the International Solar Alliance was started, and it has now progressed to some extent. There is the feeling that, this has the ability to bring about clean energy throughout the 24-hour cycle, because the sun is visible at some part of the world throughout the 24 hours. So that if you get it attached to the grid, then it works as a cycle. That's why we have a ring right round. What would you say, sir?
Yes, thank you. Before I do that, if you allow me, I'll just take 1 minute
Right.
to convey to your audience that the reason why heads of state are coming, or heads of government are coming in the beginning of the conference, is because of the disastrous experience of Copenhagen. Until Copenhagen, the heads of state and heads of government came towards the end of the conference, so that if there are outstanding issues, the heads of state and heads of government could sit and thrash out the issues. I remember vividly the French negotiator Laurent Fabius, at the time the foreign minister, he said, I don't want to put the heads of government and heads of state in this situation. And he started the process in Paris of getting the heads of state and heads of government in the beginning of the COP. Since then, we have now had the situation where every COP has received the heads of government and heads of state in the beginning of the conference so that they can make their introductory speeches and then urge the negotiators to give their best. I thought I should give you this background.
Sure, that's wonderful. Thank you, sir.
And as for your specific question about India, I think there are two things at stake for India. One, India will provide a nationally determined contribution.
Yes.
As I said earlier, I'm very curious to know what it will be. One of the things could be a 450 gigawatt target of renewable energy by 2030. This will be a massive target because we now have an installed capacity of 100 gigawatt.
Yes.
To quadruple this by 2030 is no mean achievement. I think it'll be a significant target. The two areas where India will come under pressure is one, to indicate at least a peak emission year and then a net zero. To give you an example, China has indicated a peak of 2030 and a net zero of 2060. It is the view, and I think I would bow to what the Director General from Terry thinks on this because she is more qualified. I don't believe we can indicate a 2050 or a 2060. But one way out would be for India to say we can only indicate a net zero provided finance and technology is forthcoming. What the G20 calls critical enablers. If the critical enablers are forthcoming, then India can indicate a net zero, otherwise no. The other area where India will come under pressure is the consumption of coal. India obviously is one of the largest consumers of coal because we have coal reserves. We don't consume as much coal as China. Definitely China consumes more coal than the rest of the world put together. We have gone along with the G20 statement of saying that all overseas plants on coal will come to an end. At least new coal plants abroad will not be built by international finance by the end of this year. The problem is domestic consumption of coal, which is rising because of the pandemic and because there is an energy shortage in the world today, and that economic recovery is more important than climate change at this point for countries like India, very frankly, because livelihoods are at stake, poverty has increased. So that is really the battle, and that is the key concern and issue for India.
Dr. Dhawan, what would you say? I mean, would India mention about a target of net zero at some stage, or at least a peak where we would reach our peak emissions?
As Ambassador Mohan Kumar had said, it's very difficult because see, there are many issues. It is not as simple. Definitely there is a will that India would like to be less polluting as much as possible. But definitely, as rightly mentioned, we are just emerging out of the pandemic, and right now what we need is jobs for our people. We need to save them from poverty. And environment, yes, it remains extremely important, but then in terms of India's contribution in bringing climate change, it is much, much less than the developed part of the world. And therefore, when we are talking of net zero, I'll put it this way, that yes, with the new industry, it should be conscious of putting whatever methods they are doing for reducing carbon footprint, but then it should not be that which year. One will try to do it as soon as possible, depending on the availability of finances as well as the technologies. So it is very important for the developed part to give technologies to India, help them in fine-tuning them and ensuring that it is put into use. We all have to remember it's only one planet that we have to live, and therefore we have to work towards it.
But Ambassador Mohan Kumar, you want some?
Point
go ahead.
I would also like to make, and that is that it is not just solar. We have to look into various renewable energies. it may not be feasible to transmit energy over long distances. So rather that looking into that energy can be generated in Rajasthan and then transmitted to Orissa, that may not be the best option, and one will have to look into which part of renewable is to be applied to which part of India.
Okay, so they are local solutions, not global solutions, and on that context, in that context. But Ambassador Mohan Kumar, so the issue is that young people are looking at you know, what these because there is an underlying fear that has been voiced by the youngsters several times over, that you know, this is our planet of the future and you are giving it to us in a pretty bad shape. So either you act now, or you know, get out of your office right now, or something like that. To the extent, I mean, they've gone to that extent. The issue is, what do you think? I mean, to send out a message to the next generation that you know, everyone is serious about climate change and about these ambitious targets. They have to be ambitious, and they have to also appear. The nations who are making these commitments have to appear responsible. So, I mean, the question is of responsibility. How does one convey that?
I agree with you. I think everybody has to be responsible. But that is why the phrase that you find in the Paris Agreement is common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities in accordance with national circumstances. Now, I agree that the language is very long and unwieldy, because diplomats are used to such language, and this was heavily negotiated in Paris. So we will have to go by this language. There is a common responsibility, which means countries cannot say that I will not do anything. So even Maldives has indicated a net zero of 2030.
Okay.
Maldives is at risk from really submerging completely and disappearing. So Maldives has indicated a net zero of 2030, United States has indicated a net zero of 2050, and China has indicated a net zero of 2060. So there is a common responsibility. Everybody has to do something. That's clear. And yet there has to be a sense of differentiated responsibility,
right,
which means countries which have been responsible for historical legacy emissions have to do much more. And that is the only point that India is making. By the way, responding to your earlier point, I also think it's important to understand India has moved from being a part of the problem to being a part of the solution. In 2015, we launched the International Solar Alliance.
Yes.
In 2021, Prime Minister of India and Boris Johnson are going to launch the Green Grids Initiative, which is an operationalization of the International Solar Alliance. So we are doing our bit, and I don't think anybody can legitimately say that India is not doing its part. I think, as I said, the real issues are going to be coal, climate finance, and climate justice, or responsible consumption and production. Having said all of this, I must be honest with you, this is a particularly difficult year for a COP to take place, because all economies are emerging from the pandemic. So the immediate priority is economic recovery, livelihoods, and anti-poverty programs. These are at the top of the priorities for governments. I'm not saying environment is less important, but obviously if people's lives are at stake, then you have to put that first, which is what governments are doing. So that is really the conflict or the dilemma in COP26. At a time when, for example, Joe Biden, the American president, is coming to Glasgow, and he's not even able to get his bills through in his Senate or House of Congress. So there are issues everywhere. It's not as if it is only India which has the issue of coal or indicating a peak emission year or whatever. Every country has issues. As far as young activists are concerned, I mean, people like Thunberg, Greta Thunberg, and
Yes,
so on.
yes.
I also think people will have to talk to them. Somebody has to talk to these people and make them understand that while their intentions are very honorable, it is very difficult for governments to immediately switch from one form of energy to the other. What do you do with coal plants in India? It's very easy for outsiders to say that India should get rid of coal. It is so difficult. If you take Jharkhand, if you take Bihar, if you take Chhattisgarh, so many lives are at stake, and we have billions of tons of coal. What do you want us to do? It's not as if we don't want clean air for our children. Certainly, Dr. Dhawan and me would like to leave for our children better air in Delhi. There is no question. Both she and I would love to have clean air. So would you, Mark.
Yes, absolutely.
But it is not easy. It is not easy. And this is what I think people, with due respect to Greta Thunberg,
All right.
is what she and other activists have to understand.
In fact, we will take a look at this particular story and then come back to our discussion, because India, along with Australia, the UK, and small island developing states, they will be launching a new initiative for infrastructure for resilient island states on the sidelines of COP26. Australia, India, and the UK have committed an initial funding of $10 million. Tapas Bhattacharya, who's there for us, spoke to Gayatri Issar Kumar, who's the High Commissioner of India to the United Kingdom, regarding the Prime Minister's visit to Glasgow.
Joining me is Gayatri Issar Kumar, High Commissioner of India to UK. First and foremost, we'd like to ask you about the COP26 agenda. It's a huge event. Climate change is something that everybody is talking about, and COP26 happening in Glasgow. What is going to be the major agenda here?
Well, of course, climate change and climate action with greater urgency. For India, it will be an occasion to launch two major initiatives under the International Solar Alliance and under the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And of course, the fact that this meeting is happening straight after G20 in Rome makes it an occasion for the world to see how we can address the priority of economic revival alongside sustainable development through very, very good and urgent action on mitigating the impact of climate change.
Ma'am, Prime Minister is coming here. What kind of program can we expect in Glasgow? Indian community members are very keen to meet Prime Minister in person.
I think that is the only part where it will not be to the full expectation of the Indian community due to COVID restrictions, of course, and due to access restrictions, because this wonderful city is being prepared for so many delegations coming from around the world. Some of the members of the Indian community are coming to the hotel in the permissible number, and they will have the opportunity to see and to greet the Honorable Prime Minister. And of course, I'm looking forward to other occasions when we shall have the Prime Minister here on a full-fledged visit, and the entire Indian community, of course, will be watching now to hear the Honorable Prime Minister while he participates in COP26, and will be looking to the social media for his messages. So they will be participating in that way and welcoming the Honorable Prime Minister of India while he is here in the UK.
Ma'am, UK is having a bilateral with PM Modi. Boris Johnson will be meeting. What can we expect from that bilateral? I believe the work that is going on along with UK and Australia about managing the IRIS program, if I'm not wrong. So what is the latest from that?
That, of course, will be a very special initiative that will be launched under the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure Initiative. That is India and UK and Australia. And it will be a way of helping small islands and also developing states to cope with, to prepare for, to preempt a disastrous impact of natural calamities, and to make sure that we have green infrastructure, and to make sure that we have climate resilient infrastructure. An amount of $10 billion has been committed, and we hope that there will be lots of partners in that very soon. The bilateral agenda is going to be a review of the implementation and of the roadmap 2030, on which a lot of progress has been made already since our two prime ministers met in May 2021, particularly in trade, in finance, in regional and global priorities such as vaccine, mutual recognition of certifications, of course climate action, and they will also discuss defense and security issues which are of common concern.
Appreciate your time. So that was the High Commissioner of India in UK. With Camperson Pinjal, this is Tapush Bhattacharya for TD India, Glasgow.
So let's turn to our guest once again, Dr. Vibha Dhawan. So this important initiative, Dr. Dhawan, about infrastructure for resilient island states, what is your view on it in terms of the basically serving two purposes? One is of creating the infrastructure and the other is of climate finance.
These are extremely important. I think we couldn't have done without it. Mm-hmm. What has happened in the last year, and just to take the discussion further, why climate change has occurred largely due to, I should say, mismanagement, or we were not bothered about our planet. COVID, with so many negatives, have definitely taught us one thing, and that is that whatever happens in one part of the world is going to have impact on the entire world. This generation, I should say, apart from few activists, but otherwise they are far more responsible. And basically, when you talk to any youngsters, they know what climate change is, why it is occurring, and what their responsibilities are. If we look at what happened last year in terms of natural calamity, part of the planet is untouched. But taking capacity of our poor is extremely, I should say, very risky for them. They can't even, some of them, perhaps they will, either they have lost lives or they have entered poverty for next 2 generations, sort of a thing. So therefore, when we look at it, that initiatives of this kind, climate finance, it's extremely important. The one who are responsible for it, they should also pay for it. And also we need to have infrastructure, which will take care of our communities for long times to come, and they don't suffer because of the climate change.
Well, the importance also, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, is because of the small island states disappearing because of the rise of sea levels. So, I mean, the kind of resilient infrastructure that is required requires some sort of innovation. And the question is also how feasible and how long-term can this be? I mean, you can't create a new island over and above the island.
So it goes to the heart of what I think is an important divergence between the developed countries and the small island economies. It's a case of mitigation versus adaptation. That obsession by the developed countries that mitigation, which means you keep on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, which is of some relevance to countries like India, China, United States, etc. But if you are a Maldives, if you are a St. Lucia, you are not emitting any greenhouse gas emissions. Your problem is other people's actions are impacting your survival. So that is why India, which by the way is also a victim of climate change and global warming, we have not been responsible for historical emissions. But if you look at our coastal states, there are regular floods which actually impact India adversely. So India has been taking up adaptation and telling the climate change conference, it is not enough to just keep talking of mitigation. You have to do adaptation. And that is why we launched the Coalition of Disaster Relief Infrastructure, which got wide support. So this is in line with the India and Prime Minister's vision that small island economies are not about greenhouse gas emissions. They want financial assistance so that they can tackle the climate change here and now. They are not bothered about United States reaching net zero by 2050, because some island will tell you that by 2050, I'm not going to exist.
Yes.
Time you do net zero, I'm out. So I think you have to focus equally on mitigation and adaptation. That's really the heart of the issue.
Indeed. Dr. Dhawan, what is the indication that, I mean, these small island states, I mean, the evidence actually that they are actually disappearing under the water? Is this, I mean, is it being seen clearly that this is happening? Because there is evidence, of course, that the sea levels have risen because of the icebergs melting and the glaciers melting and stuff like that. But the point is that we haven't seen any island actually saying that it's disappeared.
No, not as yet, and I hope it doesn't happen either.
Right.
So, but then if you simply go by the statistics, yes, there is a very, very serious threat. And not just when we are talking of islands, I'll say that even India needs a different strategy. The entire Mumbai, if we look at it, the kind of floods we have year after year, and most of the industrial houses, they are just along the coast. So even they have to think what to do in the near future. So it's definitely a threat, and as far as the studies shows us, it is very serious threat.
Indeed, and another serious threat, Dr. Dhawan, would also be that, as you did mention about the floods, a lot of heavy rain events are taking place because the moisture-laden air is moving into the land, of course, because of excessive water in the seas. The issue is, and the heating of the environment. This is going to continue to, are we going to see, events like this on a regular basis in terms of throughout the year, whether it's winter or summer, have heavy rain events? Are we likely to see something like this?
That is what climate change predicted. It wasn't that it's just not restricted to increase in temperature. It is the kind of vagaries we are facing today. It might rain, it's the extremes of temperature, extremes of rain, unseasonal rains, and so on. And I do see the way it is happening in last 1 year. Perhaps it's going to continue, which is, again, I should say it's threat to the mankind. And many a times we say save the planet. I don't think so. Planet will remain where it is. It will be perhaps happier without the humankind. And therefore it is save ourselves. We have to, if we need to exist, humans have to exist in this planet. Right. They will have to change the way they are operating today.
So this question of adaptation and mitigation, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, is a question for everybody. And even whether you're within the cities or, because nobody is I mean, free from this danger. In this context, I mean, what would you think? I mean, should there be a role for every individual? Would you see the carbon credit system, something that people are looking at their phones about the number of steps they take and stuff like that? Maybe the number of carbon credits they have should also be something that they should be looking forward to?
Yes, I think that is one way out. I think carbon markets, carbon credits. I think the key and the heart of the issue is, can countries like United States, let's say Europe, etc., vacate some carbon space for countries like India? That is the question I would like to pose to the summit, Frank. And that essentially goes to what Dr. Dhawan said some time ago, which is, you're talking net zero, frankly.
Yes.
They shouldn't be talking about net zero. I'm sorry, they should be talking about net
negative. Yes.
That is the only way in which some carbon space can be made available. Right now, the problem is United States and Europe have the first movers advantage. They've occupied carbon space. China has very rapidly done the same. And because India has moved slowly, we are not left with any carbon space at all. That is the tragedy now. Because we are late movers or last movers, we are being told, no, you will not have space. Keep on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. How are we supposed to do that? When you still have 30 to 40% of the people in India who suffer from what I call energy poverty. And there is a symbiotic relationship between energy poverty and economic poverty. You cannot get out of economic poverty in India unless you get out of energy poverty. So how are you going to handle this if no carbon space is available for India? This is a very, very tough conference, Mark. Make no mistake. I'm glad the Prime Minister is there. Decisions have to be taken at his level.
Right.
I have been saying this on your program. People seem to think India is doing fine. We can praise our own record, but make no mistake, India will come under pressure. There will be an attempt to paint India as the villain of the piece. This happens in every climate change conference. In every climate change conference, India has to demonstrate that we are part of the solution. I don't think we should be unduly worried about this, but it is a fact that there is an image issue as well. They will never show India with rapid augmentation of solar energy. When they show India, they always show India with the coal, with the burning of coal.
Yes, okay.
So this is the image we have. So it is an important, challenging climate change conference for the Prime Minister and for India, and I hope we can come good at the end of it.
Dr. Dhawan, so this is the 26th Conference of Parties, and we know that, earlier there were the Millennium Development Goals, and now they are the Sustainable Development Goals. So the world has changed its orientation, and many of those goals are, still remain the same in terms of poverty and those sort of things. But the issue is that, what do you think? I mean, from the point of view of heads of government, would such conferences bring about a sort of a total mindset change in the way the whole world operates, or is it going to be always about, let those with historical responsibilities act first and then we shall act? Because that, ultimately that is the question that people will put forward to everyone. It's time for everyone to act. That's the question that they will say.
Yeah, well, if you ask me, it is the responsibility of the governments when we talk of sustainable development goals.
Yes.
But I take it this way, that it is responsibility of every citizen. You can't leave things to the government. And there are few things which you can do at your level as well. The unfortunate part, and I'll say that we were moving in the right direction for SDGs, and I'll say various players, whether it is philanthropic organizations, the research organizations, NGOs, implementation organizations, they all were working best to their capability, and I would say that I was very confident we are going to achieve them. But unfortunately, this pandemic has really taken us back. There are so many things when we talk of livelihoods, poverty. I should say we have slipped many years back again. So it is going to be tough. But again, when you talk of that heads of the states, it is again reinforcing this is what the countries would like to do. It is at the international level. So people, they do make commitments, and it is that the others start acting along those. So it shows commitment at political level. And of course, I'll put it this way, others are on the job and everyone would like to do it.
Ambassador Mohan Kumar, is there a new way of living? I mean, these are the kind of philosophical questions that we can ask, because you say that no, I mean, people will say that you cannot close a coal mine, for instance. But the question is of asking for a drastic change in the way the world will live, so that humanity can bring the world back into, let's say, the stage of equilibrium that it was prior to the dawn of reason. Is it possible that, the only or let's say, I'm not sure to what other species have the kind of reasoning abilities that we have, but definitely as the human species, this is the responsibility of the human species now, and they're called upon to act to prevent a catastrophic and irreversible change. Do you think, I'm just putting the point out there, that it's the collective decision of humanity, and you think we are up to the task?
So look, Mark, I am 64 years old. I'm inclined to tell both of you, who are much younger than me anyway, that we should maybe go back to sustainable lifestyles in India When I was young, India had a circular economy, fledged circular economy, which is you use stainless steel vessels and stainless steel plates instead of plastic. I never saw plastic until I came to Delhi to do my MBA at 19 years old. I grew up in the South. I never saw plastic in my life for the first 18 years of my life. And now we've started doing plastics. But now I think there is a realization in India that some of the traditional lifestyles followed in India were actually very much in accordance with sustainable development. So that is the first thing we can do. The second thing we can do is autonomously, India must make sure that it does not repeat the mistakes of China. I am saying China because United States and Europe made a large number of mistakes in the Industrial Revolution 100 years ago. But China has actually followed that same pattern. If you look at what is known as incremental macroeconomic ratio, for every dollar of GDP that China has created, China uses more energy than India. India actually uses much less energy to create $1 of GDP. I think we should concentrate on these things. I'm glad that plastic bags have been banned in Delhi.
Yes.
We should do more of these things. I think youngsters in India are much more aware of their objectives, of their responsibility towards the environment. But at the end of the day, as somebody said, one person by himself can't do it. Collectively, we will have to take a kind of oath or a promise that, listen, we will try to follow much more sustainable lifestyles. I think India will have to look very closely at what is known as the dirty industries, which is cement, steel, chemicals. These are considered the dirty industries. We will have to look at how, whether we can make investments, make sure that these plants actually operate according to the rules of sustainable development. But it goes back to the heart of where are we going to get the money for it. Thank you.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much. You did mention at the end of the day, so this is the end of the program, in fact. So at the end of the program, let's take you to some reactions of the Indian community representatives who had met Prime Minister in Glasgow today. And I'd like to thank both our guests, Ambassador Mohan Kumar and Dr. Dhawan, the Director General of TERI, for being with us.
I've done the sculpture of the Prime Minister because, as you can see, he's quite a popular gentleman. Everybody likes him. I really liked his features and I decided to do it. I have to say I'm very thrilled, first by his reaction, and he's obviously so easygoing. And I could not believe my improvisation the last minute where not having had glasses, because somebody said, where are the glasses? So I took off his own glasses, put it on, which I thought was a good move.
जिस दिन से मोदी जी ने योगा का शुरुआत की, इंटरनेशनल योगा डे की स्टार्ट की, उसी दिन से ही मैं जो हूँ, जो यूएनओ में पास हुआ, उनका जो है उन्होंने शुरू किया. योगा तो चल रहा है बहुत सेंचुरीज से, बट पॉपुलैरिटी जो उन्होंने क्रिएट की है पूरे वर्ल्ड में, उसके लिए बहुत धन्यवाद मोदी जी को, बिकॉज उसकी वजह से जो है लोग और भी योगा करने लग गए, और इट हैज़ बीन रिकग्नाइज्ड ऑल ओवर द वर्ल्ड, विच इज़ वंडरफुल, एंड इट इज़ सो गुड फॉर नॉट ओनली फिजिकल, मेंटल एंड spiritual health for everybody. And that's the human necessity nowadays in the world, is you can have a money, any amount of money, but you cannot have peace. So that creates a peace within us, which is wonderful. And that's what Modi ji has actually. And is amazing leader. He's an amazing Indian leader, and he's...
And let's go across live now to Glasgow for the opening ceremony of the COP26.
Towards our planet, then this idea matters. Imagine that the Earth is the only place in a galaxy where intelligent life exists. The only place where collections of atoms as old as time have come together into improbable patterns. that can think and feel and bring meaning to an otherwise meaningless universe. How should we behave? Surely, notwithstanding the fact that we're tiny, fragile things on a mote of dust, orbiting around one star amongst 400 billion, we must consider ourselves and our world to be inconceivably valuable.
With her poem written for COP26, we are joined by writer, performer and storyteller Yersa Daly Ward.
Nothing will be saved without you. It is important to begin with the fact. This is your invitation to lead with light. You were born to be creators of the ground entrusted. Yesterday's beneficiaries, inheritors of land, air, time. Now is all we have left, holding the world in our hands, with the most inconvenient truth to honor the earth, land, sky. Our day is older than it used to be, but not yet gone. The day is dimming and still not done. Come, leading lights. We were born to be creators of the possible future. The truth will not leave without you, heavy though it may be. The staggering state of play is leaning upon you. The hour that you stand in is goldening, already coppering, already fire. Ancestors of tomorrow, this is an intervention. Earth is talking to you today, and Earth has plenty to say. Be architects of something new, protectors of the day. Be shining final hopes, designers of chance and change. The hour is crimson, turning, turning. The hour is bruising, bluing, blue. We are human, and we owe our home. Let's pay our home dues. These are the implications, so we have to end with the facts. Anything less than your best is too much to pay. Anything later than now is too little, too late. Nothing will change without you.
Please welcome the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to COP. Welcome to Glasgow and to Scotland, whose most globally famous fictional son is almost certainly a man called James Bond, who generally comes to the climax of his highly lucrative films strapped to a doomsday device, desperately trying to work out which coloured wire to pull to turn it off, while a red digital clock ticks down remorselessly to a detonation that will end human life as we know it. And we are in roughly the same position, my fellow global leaders, as James Bond today. Except that the tragedy is, this is not a movie. And the doomsday device is real. And the clock is ticking to the furious rhythm of hundreds of billions of pistons and turbines and furnaces and engines with which we are pumping carbon into the air faster and faster, record outputs, and quilting the Earth in an invisible and suffocating blanket of CO2, raising the temperature of the planet with a speed and an abruptness that is entirely man-made. And we know what the scientists tell us, and we have learned not to ignore them. 2 degrees more and we jeopardize the food supply for hundreds of millions of people as crops wither, locusts swarm. 3 degrees and you can add more wildfires and cyclones, twice as many, 5 times as many droughts, and 36 times as many heat waves. 4 degrees and we say goodbye to whole cities. Miami, Alexandria, Shanghai, all lost beneath the waves. And the longer we fail to act, the worse it gets, and the higher the price when we are eventually forced by catastrophe to act, because humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow. I was there with many of you in Copenhagen 11 years ago when we acknowledged we had a problem. I was there in Paris 6 years ago when we agreed to net zero and to try to restrain the rise in the temperature of the planet to 1.5 degrees. And all those promises will be nothing but blah, 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 to coin a phrase. And the anger and the impatience of the world will be uncontainable unless we make this COP26 in Glasgow the moment when we get real about climate change. And we can. We can get real on coal, cars, cash, and trees. We have the technology to deactivate that ticking doomsday device, not all at once. I'm afraid it's too late for that. But one by one, and with ever greater speed and efficiency, we can begin to close down those billions of hydrocarbon combustion chambers that you find currently in every corner of the planet. We can phase out the use of cars with hydrocarbon internal combustion engines. By 2035, we can do that. We in the UK are leading by ending new sales by 2030. We can end the use of coal-fired power stations. We can do it by 2040 in the developing world, 2030 in the richer nations. We can plant hundreds of millions of trees, 1 trillion. It's not technologically difficult. And halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. Not just because it's a spiritually uplifting and beautiful thing to do, but because that is the way to restore the balance of nature and to fix carbon in the air. And as we look at the green industrial revolution that's now needed around the world, we in the developed world must recognize the special responsibility we have to help everybody else to do it. Because it was here in Glasgow 250 years ago that James Watt came up with a machine that was powered by steam, that was produced by burning, began to tick. And in 200 years, the industrialized countries were in complete ignorance of the problem that they were creating. We now have a duty to find those funds. $100 billion a year that was promised in Paris by 2020, but which we won't deliver until 2023, to help the rest of the world to move to green technology. But we cannot and will not succeed by government spending alone. We in this room can deploy hundreds of billions, no question. But the market has hundreds of trillions, and the task now is to work together to help our friends to decarbonize, using our funds, the funds we have in development assistance, and working with all the multilateral development banks so that in the key countries that need to make progress, we can jointly identify the projects that we can help to de-risk so that the private sector money can come in just the same way that it was the private sector that enabled the UK to end our dependence on coal, become the Saudi Arabia of wind. We have the technology. We can find the finance, and we must. And the question for us all today is whether we have the will. And my fellow leaders, as I look around this room, I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but you know, we all talk about what we're going to do in 2050 or 2060. I don't think it will escape the notice of the crowds of young people outside, the billions who are watching around the world, half of the population of the world under 30, that the average age of this conclave of world leaders, I'm afraid to say, is over 60. I fully intend to be alive in 2060. I will be a mere 94 years old, even if I'm not still in Downing Street. But you don't know. But the children who will judge us are children not yet born, and their children. And we are now coming center stage before a vast and uncountable audience of posterity, and we mustn't fluff our lines or miss our cue, because if we fail, they will not forgive us. They will know that Glasgow was the historic turning point when history failed to turn. They will judge us with bitterness and with a resentment that eclipses any of the climate activists of today. And they will be right. COP26 will not and cannot be the end of the story on climate change. Even if this conference ends with binding global commitments for game-changing, real-world action, 2 weeks from now, smokestacks will still belch in industrial heartlands. Cows will still belch in their pastures, even if some brilliant Kiwi scientists are teaching them how to be more polite. Cars, powered by petrol and diesel, will still choke congested roads in the world's great cities. No one conference could ever change that. If summits alone solved climate change, then we wouldn't have needed 25 previous COP summits to get where we are today. But while COP26 will not be the end of climate change, it can and it must mark the beginning of the end. In the years since Paris, the world has slowly and with great effort and pain built a lifeboat for humanity. And now is the time to give that lifeboat a mighty shove into the water, like some great liner rolling down the slipways of the Clyde. Take a sextant sighting on 1.5 degrees and set off on a journey to a cleaner, greener future. So let us therefore, in the next days, devote ourselves to this extraordinary task, so that we not only continue with a program that is of green industrial revolution that is already creating millions of high-wage, high-skilled jobs in power and technology, taking our economies forward. Let us also do enough to save our planet and our way of life. And as we work, let us think about those billions of beady eyes that are watching us around the world, increasingly edgy and disenchanted. And let us think of the billions more of the unborn, whose anger will be all the greater if we fail. We cannot let them down. We have the ideas, we have the technology, we have the bankers, we have the corporations and the NGOs, we have the interpreters, we have the meeting rooms. If all else fails, we have the unbeatable hospitality and refreshment of Glasgow. We may not feel much like James Bond, not all of us necessarily look like James Bond, but we have the opportunity and we have the duty to make this summit the moment when humanity finally began, and I stress began, to defuse that bomb, and to make this the moment when we began irrefutably to turn the tide and to begin the fight back against climate change. Yes, it's going to be hard, but yes, we can do it. And so let's get to work with all the creativity and imagination and goodwill that we possess. Thank you very much, and good luck to all of us. Thank you.
Bringing voices from Earth into COP26, please welcome climate campaigner Brianna Fruin.
When I was a little girl, I was taught the importance and impact of words. In my culture, in Samoa, there's a proverb that goes, "E pala ma'a ai le pala upu." It means that even stones decay, but words remain. A lesson in knowing how words can be wielded, how text can change everything, how each word you use is weighted, how switching one word or number could reframe worlds, how climate action can be vastly different from climate justice, how 2 degrees could mean the end and 1.5 could mean a fighting chance. You all have the power here today to be better, to remember that in your meeting rooms and drafting documents are more than just black and white objects, to remember that in your words you wield the weapons that can save us or sell us out. I don't need to remind you the reality of vulnerable communities. If you're here today, you know what climate change is doing to us. You don't need my pain or my tears to know that we're in a crisis. The real question is whether you have the political will to do the right thing, to wield the right words, and to follow it up with long overdue action. If you're looking for inspiration on this, look no further than the climate leadership of young Pacific people. We are not just victims to this crisis. We have been resilient beacons of hope. Pacific youth have rallied behind the cry, "We are not drowning, we are fighting." This is our warrior cry to the world. We are not drowning, we are fighting. This is my message from Earth to COP. I hope you remember my words today and look closely at your words as you go throughout COP, because e pala ma'a ai le pala upu. Thank you. Now please welcome to the stage Chai Suroi.
My name is Chai Suroi. I'm only 24, but my people have been living in the Amazon forest at least 6,000 years. My father, the great chief Almir Suroi, taught me that we must listen to the stars, the moon, the wind, the animals, and the trees. Today, the climate is warming, the animals are disappearing, the rivers are dying, and our plants don't flower like they did before. The earth is speaking. She tells us that we have no more time. A friend asked me, will we continue to think that today's injuries can be resolved with ointments and painkillers, even though we know that tomorrow our wounds will only run deeper? We need a different path, and with bold and global changes. It's not.
Well, welcome to World Today. I'm Gautam Roy. You just witnessed these live broadcast of the opening ceremony of COP26. Very soon the world leaders will also be having their own summit, and you will hear beyond, addresses going beyond the host, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who himself sort of set the tune about what is really expected out of COP26. Like he said, it's a make or break event. He compared everyone who's participating almost to James Bond, the son of Scotland, where in Glasgow the COP26 is taking place this time around, saying that we have the opportunity, all of us, to become James Bonds, diffusing bombs at the last moment and saving the world. And he said that there is a need for a green revolution, industrial revolution this time around. And he said that we have to also acknowledge and understand and then act upon how the developed world has a greater responsibility to meet the climate change challenge than the developing world. So echoing a lot of thoughts that India and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also been really voicing, and we will be talking about it further as well. But let's first get you up to speed with what's been happening. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi began his engagements in Glasgow by meeting the Indian community's leaders there and Indologists, as well as climate change innovators from India. The PM could be seen warmly interacting with them. This interaction took place on the sidelines of the COP26 summit. And we'll bring you all that, in terms of the engagement that the PM had a little while later. But right now we're going back live to the opening ceremony of COP26.
Have been the 6 hottest years on record. Our addiction to fossil fuels is pushing humanity to the brink. We face a stark choice. Either we stop it or it stops us. And it's time to say enough. Enough of brutalizing biodiversity. Enough of killing ourselves with carbon. Enough of treating nature like a toilet. Enough of burning and drilling and mining our way deeper. We are digging our own graves. Our planet is changing before our eyes, from the ocean depths to mountain tops, from melting glaciers to relentless extreme weather events. Sea level rise is double the rate it was 30 years ago. Oceans are hotter than ever and getting warmer faster. Parts of the Amazon rainforest now emit more carbon than they absorb. Recent climate action announcements might give the impression that we are on track to turn things around. This is an illusion. The last published report on national determined contributions showed that they would still condemn the world to a calamitous 2.7-degree increase. And even if the recent pledges were clear and credible, and there are serious questions about some of them, we are still careening towards climate catastrophe. Even in the best case scenario, temperatures will rise well above 2 degrees. So, as we open this much anticipated climate conference, we are still heading for climate disaster. Young people know it. Every country sees it. Small island developing states and other vulnerable ones live it. And for them, failure is not an option. Failure is a death sentence. Excellencies, we face a moment of truth. We are fast approaching tipping points that will trigger escalating feedback loops of global heating. But investing in the net zero climate resilient economy will create feedback loops of its own, virtuous circles of sustainable growth, jobs, and opportunity. We have progress to build upon. A number of countries have made credible commitments to net zero emissions by mid-century. Many have pulled the plug on international financing of coal. Over 700 cities are leading the way to carbon neutrality, and the private sector is waking up. The Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, the gold standard for credible commitments and transparent targets, is managing $10 trillion in assets and catalyzing change across industries. The Climate Action Army, led by young people, is unstoppable. They are larger, they are louder, and I assure you they are not going away, and I stand with them. Excellencies, the science is clear. We know what to do. First, we must keep the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. This requires greater ambition on mitigation and the immediate concrete action to reduce global emissions by 45% by 2030. G20 countries have a particular responsibility as they represent around 80% of emissions. According to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, in light of national circumstances, developed countries must lead the effort. But emerging economies too must go the extra mile, as their contribution is essential for the effective reduction of emissions. We need maximum ambition from all countries on all fronts to make Glasgow a success. I urge developed countries and the emerging economies to build coalitions to create the financial and technological conditions to accelerate the decarbonization of the economy as well as the phase-out of coal. These coalitions are meant to support the large emitters that face more difficulties in the transition from grey to green, for them to be able to do it. Let's have no illusions. If commitments fall short by the end of this COP, countries must revisit their national climate plans and policies.
So they were hearing live from the opening ceremony of COP26, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, urging the entire world to act together, and especially the G20 countries. We just had a summit in Rome in Italy that they need to do more, where setting targets for cutting back emissions or for meeting financial needs, climate financial needs are concerned. We'll be hearing more on that front as things proceed further.